gentlemen, and welcome back to the Wadcast, the only micronational podcast that as time goes on becomes more and more like an elaborate scheme from a Seinfeld episode. Today, I'm with my co-host James, and there are no guests, and we will be discussing
Micronational organizations.
wonderful, great. So, James, tell us, what constitutes a micronational organization?
Well, it's quite literally what the word is. It requires at least two micronations, preferably a few more than that, and it is an organization.
Why do you think that people make micronational organizations?
Do you want the honest answer, or do you want the answer that sounds nice?
You know what we're all about here at the Wadcast, money and also honesty.
Well, one of the most prominent ugly truth reasons is clout. It makes one look cool, it makes them look professional. However, in reality, they'll often be criticized with the term that many micronationalists know, YAMO, I don't know how to pronounce it, aka YAMO, an acronym for Yet Another Micronational Organization.
How does participating in a fictional organization get your micronation clout, as they say?
Well, it's not necessarily participating in one, it's founding one that I was referring to in particular. However, the benefits of a micronational organization vary on the organization, and like I said earlier, the purpose of the organization. The purpose is something that varies from organization to organization. There's development ones, there's diplomacy ones, and there's ones, say they focus specifically on diplomacy, development, or just so happen to be one or the other. I would say that in practice, the Cupertino Alliance is primarily a development organization with things like the Cupertino Guide Wiki program, the nature projects that they've launched, some of the other projects they've launched that are under the current administration, many of which have been revived and are intended to be revived over time. And then there's things like somewhat of what the Grand Unified Micronational has become, or GUM, is a diplomatic organization. And that is mostly primarily as a reason is that many nations within Grand Unified Micronational often end up participating in diplomacy. And even without formal diplomacy, the Grand Unified Micronational is a very good venue for representatives of particular micronations to interact, especially, if a smaller micronation who becomes even an observer member, a provisional member of the Grand Unified Micronational, that is a way for them to be able to interact with more prominent, well-known guard type nations within the community.
Right. Grand Unified Micronational, gum. I love gum. I love 5 Gum, Wrigley's chewing gum, all of the gums out there. Let's circle back to what you said about the Cupertino Alliance being a developmental organization. We counted off, you counted off some programs that it's launched. Could you elaborate about what exactly they do and how they're developmental?
So the Cupertino Alliance has a few programs. Unfortunately, some of them are currently not active. Some of them currently are active. One of them is the Cupertino Gazette, which has become more active in recent times. And the Cupertino Gazette was essentially a newspaper that released info regarding the Cupertino Alliance. They did things similar to Minutes of the Quorum of Grand Unified Micronational, and they could overview sessions, and that has been somewhat revived lately. There have been things, Cupertino Alliance has done really something well in informing members of what they're voting on when membership applications come in, and have Minister of Membership Attainment make detailed documents stating info about the micronations, which is not something that many other micronational organizations do. There is the Green Cities Project, which is a project that, quote, subsidizes member nations' agriculture and plants, end quote. And primarily it is regarding websites purchasing, member states purchasing seeds from a few websites. Canada, Mexico, America purchases it from rareseeds.com. UK is supposed to go to seedparade.co.uk. And Australia goes to the seedcollection.com.au.
So, Cupertino Alliance, at least from your description of it, is a developmental organization. GUM is a diplomatic organization, if I take you correctly. So these two seem to fill niches, I'd say.
To clarify, Grand Unified Micronational is not universally accepted as a diplomacy organization. That's just what I think it is in practicality. Whereas, yeah, like the Cupertino Alliance is pretty objectively a developmental organization.
I follow. So, with these two both filling these niches, do you think that other micronational organizations can thrive, or they're destined to become YAMOs, as you'd call them?
There are some organizations that can still be created that can still be effective. There's a couple micronational organizations that are in Asia. However, some of them, I can't remember which one. One of them has become primarily relatively inactive after. Those listeners can research this on their own on micronations.wiki. The Indian shock of last year, where a bunch of micronational-like entities were exposed and got into some issues, and that's caused some inactivity within some. But they're primarily, I would say, that the nations that have banded together to make micronational organizations that are effective in recent times would probably be the few Asian micronational organizations. The Micronational Assembly is basically just full of far-right members now. I don't even know if it still exists. It very well might not these days. I don't pay much attention to it. There was the revived Organization of Active Micronations, either last year or the year before my time in this community, which, it was not a professional environment, but it did bring a lot of micronationalists to prominence who are still prominent today, so it's hard to not give them credit for that. So yeah, there can be other organizations that are prominent, but I would say the top two in this community are the Cupertino Alliance and the Grand Unified Micronational. Which is better of those two is, of course, a very debated topic within this community.
Yeah. You said that a lot of the ones that are thriving, being created recently, are Asian organizations. Why do you think that is? Is it because the existing organizations don't cater to them?
You basically got it spot on. A lot of Asian micronations, I would say for good reason, felt like they weren't being represented in this mainstream microwiki community. The Cupertino Alliance, with their Minister of Asian and Oceanian Affairs, has done very well in catering towards Asian audiences and Australian audiences in this community, and have created some really good programs. So you see, there has been many sessions in the Cupertino Alliance over the last few months that are time zones that are specifically made to be able to be accessible for members of the Asian continent, whether it be there's a few in India, other parts of Asia, Asian Pacific area, and because a lot of the times where sessions would occur for the Cupertino Alliance were not accessible because they took place at times where they would be sound asleep or at work, at school. And depends on your age and whatever. You know what I mean? And I think they've done a really good job with that. And those sessions can actually be very active, and you'd be shocked at how active they are. The Grand Unified Micronational has, I would say that I might get heat for this, but were inspired primarily by the Cupertino Alliance in expanding outreach to Asian members of the community by appointing the leader of Vishwamitra as their uh, Asia Affairs Secretary. I don't believe they've hosted any Asian time zone chaos session. Quorums, I would say, I suppose, as the Grand Unified Micronational calls them. As of the time of this episode, I very well might be wrong because Desert District, the nation I lead, is an observer. I can view sessions, but I can't actually attend them, so I don't need to pay much attention to them. So I very well may be wrong. But so in conclusion, the Cupertino Alliance really has stepped up, and the Grand Unified Micronational slowly but surely is beginning to follow their lead and try to cater to those in the Asian community.
Right. So you said that Desert District was an observer in the Gum Alliance?
Yes, the Desert District is an observer in Grand Unified Micronational. That is correct. As of just a few weeks ago, we obtained observership.
What does that mean practically, observership? How does it differ from not being in the Alliance at all?
So observership means that you don't have access to informal chats, but you do have access to formal chats. So you're able to engage in diplomacy with other delegates. And even though you're not able to actually speak at quorum, you're able to attend it, which is a very nice thing. And it's again able to help with diplomacy. You have partial access to the Supreme Court of Grand Unified Micronational.
What I don't get is how observership helps to abet diplomacy. I can understand membership in the same alliance, but observership, how is that different from just DMing somebody and going, diplomacy, please, mister?
Well, when a random person messages someone and says diplomacy, please, you're likely to get rejected. And if you don't get rejected, that's probably not a great sign about the diplomacy policy if they don't even know you and they say yes. Whereas the Grand Unified Micronational is a great way to be able to interact with other things, other nations, whether it be in their formal lounge or whether you're introduced in Grand Unified Micronational and you interact privately.
So what does the path to membership look like in GUM? I assume you have to be an observer for the set amount of time?
That is actually not true. You're able to apply for full membership at the beginning, and I believe that once you're approved for full membership, you are a provisional member temporarily. Although I honestly might be thinking of that incorrectly. So someone will probably point out if I'm right about that. But observership is a great way to kind of familiarize yourself with Grand Unified Micronational and allow others using Grand Unified Micronational to be familiarized with you before eventually applying for full membership.
Right. Checks out. How do you get to know somebody who's an observer if they can't participate in sessions?
Like I said, the formal lounge is a great way.
I imagine that's how diplomacy goes in real life. Just a bunch of people sitting around in a conference room, puffing on their cigars and discussing, let's nuke Pakistan.
Well, thankfully, this isn't real life. This is the micronational community.
That actually brings me back to a point that we discussed last episode, where since micronationalism isn't real life, there's less of an incentive to engage in diplomacy. How do you think that micronational organizations reconcile this?
Good question, and I don't know exactly how to answer that.
So do you think that they do? Okay, so if you can't answer that, do you think that they do reconcile it, but you're not entirely sure how, or they just ignore it?
I would say that they do somewhat. They do give motivation to engage in diplomacy. Diplomacy is a good way for nations to exchange culture. We recently did an exchange where we claimed a piece of land as part of Desert District, and then the land, half of it went to a nation we signed a treaty with, and the other half remained to us, so that there was actually a physical border between the micronation that we signed a treaty with. And it was a really great opportunity for us to become closer, not just in the diplomatic sense, but quite literally, physically closer.
Yeah, how much of that was abetted by a micronational organization, though?
It wasn't necessarily. A micronational organization can be one way, but it's not the only way.
What you're saying is that while micronational organizations are great, they aren't the only way to abet diplomacy. In that case, why do people engage in them with all the regulations at all?
Because they are still an effective way to do it, even if just not the only one, and not even inherently. It's not inherently the only effective way, but it's most certainly one way, and one way that can be very effective and has been very effective for some micronations, including Desert District.
All right, we've got some requests. My good friend, would you like to wait for those requests?
We have requests.
Yes, we have requests from a listener requesting in.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so here's a question from our guest. What made you interested or drawn into micronationalism?
Great question. The simple answer is volunteer. The complicated answer is volunteer plus more. I think what first started it is he informed me about the Principality of Sealand.
Wait, here's a thought right here. So Sealand, how would you feel that Sealand stacks up to the digital micronational community of today, contrasting things?
Pretty effectively. Because they've really catered to the online community with things like selling titles and selling pieces of land.
Here's an interesting thing to me, because Sealand just began as an excuse for some guy to run a pirate radio station. Government cracks down on his radio station. He goes, screw you. I'll create my own government with blackjack and hookers, and we'll have state-mandated pirate radio stations. How's that go for you? How do you think the community would react if some average Joe pulls up, claims this stretch of territory, going, this is my land because I want to commit crimes in it?
It would be viewed as an unrealistic claim, and they would be criticized for selling titles as opposed to having people earn them. AKA, it would not go well today. And in fact, even now, I don't think I've seen much criticism for Sealand's claims. However, I've most certainly seen what I would say is justified criticism of them selling pieces of land and titles. Because I think that something in this community that people really believe in is that titles, honors, awards should be earned, not, well, purchased. If you want to use a less friendly word, bribed for, but I don't know. Yeah, you get the point.
Another thing about Sealand is they're not claiming a piece of land. They're claiming a Fort Ruff's tower, I believe it is. Someone rolls into the micronational community claiming a tower, some artificial installation. How do you think that's gonna fly?
Not well. Especially if they can't realistically control it, which I don't think. I think they have access to Sealand, but I think it'd be hard in the present day for someone to be able to realistically control something like what Sealand is.
So what you're telling me is that while Sealand is effectively the proto-micronation, if you entered any Sealand type state into micronationalism today, it'd just not fly well.
I would say the proto micronation that lives up to today's standards is probably Molossia. Molossia's land is something that they functionally control, and in the modern day would be able to be something that someone could functionally control. And they don't really sell titles, and in fact, I don't even believe they offer citizenship to individuals currently. So Molossia, I think, is something that's a very prominent, popular micronation to those not within the micronational community that still lives up to the standards of the microwiki community.
But you have to admit that Sealand did play a role in the development of micronationalism. You yourself admitted that it was me showing you Sealand that first sparked that interest.
Without a doubt, I'm not denying that in the slightest. I was just giving an example of another prominent migration that does live up to today's standards. But Sealand is most certainly a very, very prominent micronation, especially to those not in the micronational community, that still would not go by today's standards in this community.
Right. So we've got another viewer question. It's for you. What type of people do you allow to be admin in Desert District? And let's enlarge this question a bit, because people aren't claiming this online cyberspace. However, it is a facet of their government. So how does your micronation and how do you think that other micronations should reconcile these two and put management in charge of their cyberspace? Should it correlate to government titles? Should it be based on something else? You tell me.
To very quickly answer the actual question that was given to me, I tend to only make admins in the Desert District Discord server, those who I've known in real life and those who I trust, to not screw up. But getting into the broader picture of, how Discord servers can, represent micronations and that. What would you have to say, Roland?
That's a good question. Well, I think that it would do good for micronations to separate themselves from the idea that if you're a member of the government, you get to be a mod on my Discord server. You get to tell the plebeians when not to post memes in general.
Yeah, no, I don't think someone who's in parliament should be telling people, no memes in general, guys. I mean it. I will hand out warrants. But no, I don't think that your members of parliament are the ones who should be handling that. No.
So here is how we fix this. We take the coveted position of telling people not to post memes in general, and we treat it as we would any internet custodial position, with respect, but they have no real power in the government of this micronation. Your job is not to legislate. Your job is to legislate those damn civilians so that they don't post memes in general.
Precisely.
This brings me to my follow-up question. How much do you think that a Discord server should be moderated specifically from micronation? We all love the don't post memes in general, but it exists because some people actually believe that's the best way to manage your micronation's Discord server. How do you do that?
I like to make clear that a micronational Discord server is a totally different thing from an actual nation. It may be the hub where non-residential citizens are able to interact, However, it's a lot more than that. Um, it's a lot more than that. Micronationalism. Desert District primarily interacts in person. I went into that, I believe, in the last episode a lot. But getting to the point. I would say that I've seen people get kicked out of a Discord server of Micronation, but they don't cease to be citizens necessarily. And I think it's really important that that being in a Discord server doesn't mean you're a citizen, and not being in a Discord server doesn't mean that you're not a citizen. And yeah, this is a discussion topic that's become very popular and, debated over the community within just about the last 2 years when Discord started becoming more prominently used in the micro wiki community. Yeah.
Right. Very interesting things. I personally do not believe in stringent moderation. If you want to post memes in general in the Wadcast Discord server, post those memes. So, James, let's circle back to the stated topic of the episode, which was, of course, micronational organizations. Whenever we discuss something on the show, we give some tips to viewers at home looking to start one of their own. So, what advice would you give to someone looking to start a micronational organization?
My advice is don't do it. It's a waste of time, and there's already 2 prominent organizations, and there's basically no chance that you're going to compete with them. There is a 1 in a million chance that you are going to be successful.
So that's grim. Didn't you talk about how micronational organizations who are not the big 2 can succeed?
They can, but again, 1 in a million. Unlikely. Waste of time.
So that's an interesting perspective. What do you think that Gum and the Cupertino Alliance did that made them not these big failures, that put them where they are today?
Well, for one, Grand Unified Micronational is quite an old organization. It's been around for a very, very long time. And as such, over time, they've had their ups, they've had their downs since 2009 when they were founded. And that's how they've gotten to where they are today.
When was the Cupertino Alliance founded?
Just a couple years back, I think 2019.
All right, so 2 years. What did they do right?
I would say that they started off as a joke organization, but then they made a dedication to become more serious, and it did work for them. Doesn't work for most people.
All right, so that's a good end to our micronational discussion. I'm going to put some people who've been asking to be guests on now. All right, say hello to Isaiah B. Invited to speak. Say hi, Isaiah.
Hello.
Welcome to the Wadcast. Welcome to the Wadcast. Welcome. How are you?
I'm well.
That's good to hear.
So what are your thoughts on micronational organizations? You got anything to add?
I would agree that the GUM, CA are the 2 major organizations, and everything else just lags behind.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, I'd like to confirm, after getting in, you do have to be a provisional member for 2 weeks in the GUM.
Thank you for that. I was honestly just had some trouble remembering that. So thank you for that. Yeah, you apply for full membership and you were provisional for 2 weeks. I knew it was something like that, but I could not remember.
I guess that's really all I gotta say.
All right, thanks for coming on the show. That feels like a good wrap to the Micronational segment. So if you were just here for that, you can click off. But for those who want to hear more of me and James talking, here's a little 5-minute segment near the end where we will discuss just pop culture, what's going on in the world.
What are your favorite YouTubers, Roland?
The Wadcast is my favorite YouTuber.
You know, one of my favorite YouTubers would have to be James Hoffman. James Hoffman is a coffee YouTuber, but he is really fascinated with it and has really moved the current coffee culture to where it
Very
is.
interesting. You said that there's a coffee culture.
Yeah, coffee culture, similar, just like old guard and new guard. There's 3 waves of coffee culture: first wave, second wave, and you guessed it, third wave.
I in coffee culture am in the fabled K-cup wave, where I pop a K-cup into an instant coffee machine and get downvoted on Reddit for it.
I would call that second wave. So to simply summarize the 3 waves of coffee, first wave coffee was cheap pre-ground coffee in metal tins that were viewed as trendy in like the 1950s and 70s and 60s and maybe 80s. And then around the 90s and then later in like the 2000s, Starbucks and Coffee Bean Tea Leaf specialty type coffee chains popularized the second wave, where people did start to pay more attention to quality in coffee and paid more attention to espresso based drinks as opposed to just drip coffee, but at the same time still tended to focus on dark roasts as well as convenience over actual flavor. And the third wave coffee is basically just the second wave, but more extreme and focuses more on light roasts and sourcing and genuine quality at the expense of sometimes costing a bit more. However, I do think that you can pull off a relatively cheap, good quality coffee setup, and though it might be slightly expensive starting in, you'll end up making up what you're paying for within just a few months of instead of going to a coffee shop and paying a few bucks for a coffee each day when you're going to pay 15 cents for a coffee each day.
Interesting. Is it the ambrosia of the gods? Is it sludge water? Who knows? Coffee and more on the Wadcast. As always, I'm Woland. This is James. Subscribe to the Wadcast and stay swag.
Wadcast!
The third loves a key rattling in the jack, rattling in the jack, with your suitcase packed